Amelie had fought for years to stand on her own feet. In the noisy streets of Lusaka, she worked 3 jobs, waking before sunrise and coming home long after dark. Every kwacha she saved went into one dream, owning her own place. When she finally bought a small apartment, it felt like freedom. For the first time, she could close a door and know it was hers, a home built from sweat, hunger, and sleepless nights. But her stepfather, Mr. Banda, never once acknowledged her effort. He would look at her and say she was just lucky, as if her sacrifices meant nothing. To make it worse, he showered all his praise and attention on his biological daughter, Naledi, who lived life carefree, always expecting things to be handed to her. Amelie never argued back. She swallowed the pain quietly, though it cut deep each time her stepfather compared her to Naledi. She knew what she had built was real, and no amount of dismissal could erase the truth of her struggle. Her apartment was more than walls and a roof. It was proof that she had survived when no one believed in her. Still, she kept her guard up, because something in her heart told her that Mr. Banda's resentment could one day turn into something worse. For now, she decorated her little place with love and pride, determined that no one, not even her own family, would take away what she had fought so hard to earn. The family dinner had started like any other. The table was filled with steaming food, the smell of nshima and stew hanging in the air, and the usual chatter filling the room. Amelie sat quietly, trying to enjoy the rare moment of peace with her family. But deep down, she always felt like an outsider in her own home, especially when Mr. Banda was around. Halfway through the meal, her stepfather cleared his throat in that dramatic way he always did when he wanted everyone's attention. The room fell silent. Then, with a smug smile, he pulled out a shiny set of keys and slid them across the table. The clinking sound was loud enough to make Amelie's stomach tighten. With pride, he began, puffing up his chest, "I have decided to give this apartment to Naledi. She deserves it more." His words hung in the air like poison. Everyone's eyes widened, some gasped in shock, and for a moment it felt as if the room itself had stopped breathing. Naledi leaned back in her chair with a smirk, her hand brushing the keys like she had just won a trophy. The confidence in her smile was sharp, almost mocking, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Amelie's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the rest of the noise around her. The apartment he was talking about wasn't just a building. It was her sacrifice, her sweat, her nights of hunger, her years of endless work. And now, in front of everyone, her stepfather had given it away like a gift that cost him nothing. She wanted to scream, to shout, to tell them the truth, but her voice felt trapped in her chest. Instead, she sat frozen, her face calm while inside her body shook with silent rage. Everyone around the table stared, waiting to see how she would react, while Naledi's smirk only grew wider, certain that she had already won. Amelie sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her lap, but inside her chest her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone at the table could hear it. The words of her stepfather kept echoing in her mind. He had given her apartment to Naledi. The very place she had bled for, cried for, sacrificed for. Memories rushed in like a storm. She saw herself walking home late at night after long shifts, her body aching. She remembered skipping meals just to save a little more money, telling herself it would all be worth it when she finally had a place of her own. She remembered signing those papers with shaky hands, knowing no one had helped her, not even with a single coin. And now here they were, the same people who had ignored her struggle, treating her home as if it was theirs to give away. Every part of her wanted to scream, to slam her fists on the table, to tell them they were thieves. But Amelie had learned long ago that anger only gave them more power. So instead, she swallowed the fire rising in her throat and forced her lips to curve into a small smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't joyful. It was sharp, controlled, and cold, a smile that made even Naledi pause for a second before going back to her smug expression. That smile confused them all. They expected her to beg, to cry, to throw a tantrum so they could call her ungrateful. But Amelie refused to give them that satisfaction. She sat tall, her face calm, her eyes steady, hiding the storm brewing inside her. Only she knew what she had prepared, the secret she had kept safe in a folder at home, the one thing that would turn this insult into their downfall. So she let them laugh, let them smirk, let them believe they had stolen her dream. Deep inside, Amelie was already planning the moment she would remind them that nothing, not even their arrogance, could erase the truth. Amelie had learned long ago never to fully trust her stepfather. The way he dismissed her efforts, the way he always favored Naledi, the way he spoke as if everything she had belonged to him, it was enough for her to keep her guard up. Deep in her heart, she knew that one day his entitlement would go too far. So while everyone thought she was just a hard-working girl proud of her little apartment, Amelie was quietly making sure her dream could never be stolen. The very first week she bought the place, she had gone to see a lawyer friend. She explained her worries, and together they checked every document carefully. The title deed was placed firmly in her name alone, the lease agreement sealed with her signature, stamped, and witnessed by the law. Nothing connected it to her stepfather or to Naledi. It was hers, and only hers. She even took extra steps, keeping copies of the papers in different places, one in a safe drawer at work, another with her lawyer, and the original tucked away where no one in her family would ever think to look. At night, she sometimes pulled them out and read her own name on the deed, just to remind herself that no one could ever take this away. It gave her strength when the insult stung, when her stepfather's words made her feel small. So when Mr. Bonda stood so proudly at that dinner table and gave away her home like a prize, Amelie didn't panic. She wanted to laugh at how clueless he was. He thought his words could erase the law, as if arrogance had more power than truth. But Amelie knew better. She sat in silence, letting them celebrate, because in her heart she held the real victory. The papers were her shield, her secret weapon, and she was patient enough to wait for the right moment. What they didn't know was that every second they laughed, they were only walking closer to their own downfall. And when the day came, she would not raise her voice. She would raise the papers, and that alone would end the game. A few days later, the whole neighborhood watched as Naledi showed up with 2 big suitcases, dragging them up the stairs like a queen returning to her palace. She was laughing so loudly that people leaned out of their windows to see what the noise was about. Her phone was already in her hand, recording everything for social media. Finally moving into What I Deserve, she wrote with hearts and sparkles, posing proudly at the door as if the world had been waiting for this moment. Her followers cheered in the comments, praising her glow-up, while Amelie's name wasn't even mentioned. To Naledi, it was like Amelie never existed. With a wide smile, Naledi slid the key into the lock, certain she would step into her new life. But the moment the door opened, her laughter froze in her throat. There was Amelie, sitting calmly on the couch, not a single trace of fear or defeat in her face. The room was spotless, the curtains pulled back, sunlight pouring in as if the house itself was waiting for this moment. On her lap sat a neat folder, its edges sharp, its presence heavier than any words. Naledi blinked, confused, then forced a shaky laugh. "Oh, you're still here. Don't worry, I'll give you time to pack." But her voice cracked, betraying the nervousness bubbling under her fake confidence. Amelie didn't move. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. She simply looked at her stepsister with a calm so powerful it made the air thick. Her hands rested gently on the folder, the same way a warrior might rest on a sword. For the first time, Naledi's smirk faded. Something about Amelie's silence, the way she held herself, made it clear that this was not going to be the victory she had imagined. The suitcases, the camera, the post, it all suddenly felt ridiculous. And as neighbors peeked through their doors to see what was happening, Naledi realized too late that she had walked straight into a trap she never saw coming. Amelie rose slowly from the couch, every movement steady and deliberate. She held the folder in her hands as Naledi dropped her bags with a loud thud, her confidence slipping by the second. Without a single wasted word, Amelie pulled out a crisp white paper, the bold red court stamp shining in the sunlight. She walked over to Naledi and her father, placing it firmly in Naledi's trembling hands. You have 30 days to vacate what never belonged to you, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful, and it carried the weight of truth that no one could deny. Naledi's smirk disappeared instantly. Her eyes darted over the paper, her lips moving as she tried to process what she was reading. Mr. Banda snatched it from her hand, his face turning red as he stuttered, "Why, you can't do this. This is my family, this is my house," but the words tangled in his throat because deep down he knew the truth. The title deed, the lease, the law itself, all of it belonged to Amelie alone. For the first time, his authority meant nothing. The commotion had already drawn attention. Neighbors cracked their doors open, whispering as they watched the scene unfold. The same man who always walked around with his chest puffed out, boasting about his family, was now shrinking under the gaze of the very people he had tried to impress. Naledi looked like a child caught stealing candy, her eyes wet, her voice breaking as she begged her sister to reconsider. But Amelie didn't waver. She stood tall, her arms crossed now, her face calm but unyielding. All those years of being silenced, insulted, and dismissed had built up to this exact moment. She wasn't just protecting her apartment, she was reclaiming her dignity. The once proud Mr. Banda and his spoiled daughter were left speechless, exposed before the world. And Amelie, with nothing more than a stamped piece of paper and the strength in her voice, had turned their arrogance into pure humiliation. The moment the eviction notice was read, the room exploded into chaos. Naledi's tears came first, rolling down her cheeks as she clutched at her father's arm, wailing that it wasn't fair. Her voice grew louder with every second, echoing through the hallway until neighbors whispered from behind their doors. Mr. Banda, the man who had spoken with so much pride and arrogance only days before, was suddenly reduced to begging. His voice shook as he pleaded with Amelie, calling her daughter, as if the word alone could erase years of insults and favoritism. He promised to talk things through, to find another way, but the desperation in his tone only made his fall from power more pitiful. Amelie's mother stepped in next, her voice trembling as she begged for peace, saying that family should not fight like this. She reached for Amelie's hand, trying to remind her of love, of unity, but the weight of her silence over the years spoke louder than any words now. She had stood by and watched while Amelie was dismissed, ignored, and treated as less. And now, when the truth was finally burning bright, she wanted to calm the fire. But Amelie was unmoved. She stood in the center of the storm, her face calm, her heart steady. She thought about every cruel word, every time she was told she was lucky instead of hardworking, every moment her sacrifices had been mocked or minimized. All of it built a wall inside her, a wall she was no longer willing to let anyone climb. For years, she had been the scapegoat, the one expected to endure, to stay silent, to accept less. That chapter was closed. Without shouting, without anger, she turned her back on their tears, their begging, their empty apologies. Let them taste the bitterness of their own greed. Let them feel what it meant to be powerless. Amelie walked away, leaving behind the chaos, carrying only her strength and the unshakable truth that she owed them nothing anymore. Weeks later, the story had taken a complete turn. Naledi, who once flooded social media with her glittering selfies and boastful captions, suddenly went silent. The posts about "living in what I deserve" disappeared, and so did the fake confidence she carried everywhere. Friends who once cheered her on now whispered about how embarrassing it was to brag about a home that was never hers. The girl who thought she had one was now hiding, ashamed of the very attention she once craved. Mr. Banda's downfall was even louder. The neighbors who used to nod politely at him now laughed behind his back. The story of how his stepdaughter outsmarted him spread through the streets like fire. People shook their heads at the man who had stood so proudly at dinner, only to be crushed by the law he thought he could ignore. His reputation, once built on pride and control, crumbled into dust. Everywhere he went, whispers followed. And then there was Amelie. While her family's name sank, she rose higher than ever. She redecorated her apartment with love, painting the walls fresh, buying new furniture, filling it with the joy that came from knowing it was hers and hers alone. One afternoon, she snapped a simple picture of her living room bathed in golden light. No fancy poses, no glittering captions. Just a few words typed below, built by sweat, protected by law, and never up for debate. The post exploded instantly. People shared it, praised her strength, and applauded her courage. Comments poured in from strangers who felt inspired, women who had faced the same kind of dismissal, men who respected her resilience, and young people who finally saw proof that hard work could not be stolen. What her family tried to use to humiliate her had become the very thing that made her shine. And in the end, the apartment was no longer just her home. It was a symbol, a reminder that no one could erase what she had built with her own two hands.